Oh no. Yeah, he was talking about that. But yeah, I got to hang out with them and Ken and Dakota Lawrence.
Oh yeah,
Oh, he's a riot.
Dakota is very funny.
Poor guy. He got up Sunday morning, came running down to our room because his got flooded out.
Oh, I heard something about that.
No clue what happened. He said, I went to bed and it was dry. I wake up and it's soaked all the way to the bed.
Well, Dakota's got a good story about me because when I met him at a convention in Texas that he was at, and as that paranormal convention got a little rowdier than most paranormal conventions do, even though I know they all do to a certain degree. And he was in the room when Christopher Booth ripped my shirt off of me.
I
So
saw
that I could do
pictures
it.
of that.
And yeah, that was a pretty crazy night.
Yeah, he was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And I said, well, I don't know. Because I went upstairs looking for him because he gave us his room number, but it was like so fast you really didn't hear it as he was passing through.
Mm-hmm.
And we were driving him back and forth from the Civic Center because we had extra space and he didn't want to drive. So I would go upstairs and I'd walk the hall screaming his name. And he's like, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking for John Tenney. And he's like, what? I said, it's Scarefest, 3rd floor. The hotel we were at in Kentucky, I said, we would walk through the hall going, John Tenney, I know you're here. I said, so I was doing it to you. And he busted up. He's like, and what did John say? I said, nothing. John never came out of his room. He hid from us.
It wasn't a purposeful hiding.
I know
Sometimes
it
they just
wasn't.
have to get away.
I know it wasn't on purpose that time.
It's funny because I don't know when it is a strange thing, being all of us being connected through the internet because for as much as we're kind of all public personas, many of us, including myself, are really private people.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this weird, these lives that we live where one is completely out in the open. I just did a podcast today where I interviewed my parents and people can listen to me talking to my parents, or they see video of you online, they see video of me online, they hear about us through our Twitters and everything like that. But in reality, there's these parts of our lives that we keep very private. People, sometimes I think they know us better than they actually do.
Oh, absolutely. Because I mean, when you're at the conference, you are on your game.
Yep.
Last time we were there, you were having a tooth issue, so you weren't feeling well to begin with.
Oh, that was a disaster.
So when you left the con, you left the con. You went back to your room. You went out. You went away.
Yep.
And it's completely understandable. And a lot of people think that once we get back to the hotel, it's a big party. We normally don't see each other in the hotel unless it's accidentally in passing in the lobby.
Right.
Because we stayed in our room this past weekend, but we left the door open because Dakota kept knocking on it, and all of a sudden our room became the party room.
It's funny because last year, I think it was last year at Scarefest, I was there by myself. I didn't bring anyone with me. And I thought to myself, I'm going to have this really great kind of escape. I'm going to be able to go back and see. I was at a different hotel than most of the other people. So I thought, well, this is going to be a really good chance for me to, recharge my batteries. I'm going to go and kind of be on and, be John Tenney during the convention, and then I'll go back to my room and I'll just be able to relax. And I think I was at Scarefest for an hour when Chris Lean showed up.
Uh-oh.
And he was like, hey, I'm staying with you this weekend. So all of a sudden I had a roommate the entire weekend, and he had come down to party.
Oh. Chris is so fun, though. I mean, at least you got a good roommate. It wasn't some stuffy, obnoxious thing.
Oh, no, for sure. I adore Chris, and he knows that.
I
But it was
know.
just one of those things where I was lucky that I had gotten, the room that I had gotten was a room that had 2 bedrooms. It was like the last room that they had. And so it didn't work out that bad because I could go in my bedroom and close the door. But Chris just would not party by himself, so he just, every 20 minutes knocking on the door. Tenney, I know you're in there.
See, it's not just me. It's an actual convention staple that someone must say, "I know you're there."
It is.
Yeah, my pet out of that one. Even though I love Savannah and Chris and Nate, I adore them. Meg's my girl.
Well, Meg was the one who saved me when I had the infected tooth at Scarefest.
Well, if you remember correctly, Dr. Jim also went down that Scarefest.
Yeah.
And I had to, unfortunately, interrupt your presentation to get Meg out to help him.
Yeah.
She was a busy girl that weekend.
She was a busy girl that weekend. But she made things happen. She's one of those people where if you have anything, like I told her, when my cheek started to swell up and my tooth got bad, she made phone calls to doctors, got me a prescription for antibiotics, figured out where it was in Kentucky. I mean, I'm not from Kentucky, she's not from Kentucky, and the next thing I know, I had real medicine from a real doctor.
Right, and when Dr. Jim went down, she was over there, she took care of him, she's like dialing 911. When the ambulance showed up, she's got an ink pen and she's writing on their sheet exactly what she's, his pulse rate, his eyes, his everything. She had it all written down on the sheet on the stretcher.
Yeah, see what kind of great people we've got. And that's the other thing too. When you look around and to any curious onlookers that might bounce in for a year and bounce out, it does seem like there's nothing but drama and animosity in the paranormal community.
Right.
The reality of the situation is, the good, hardworking, loving, caring people that are in the community are just overwhelmingly willing to help and go out of their way. Everyone.
Absolutely. Actually, I'm wearing my shirt from last week's Unity Fest. It says paranormal or paradrama. I don't care.
I've often said, and I think I've talked to you and Eric about it too, and I say it when I do interviews. I have drama with my family. That drama's never going to go away.
Right.
I love my parents to death, but I'm still going to argue with them. We're still going to have disagreements, but because they're my family, I'll put up with it. I understand. And then when you have something like the paranormal community, it's a very loose-knit group of people who interact maybe 4 or 5 times a year in person at conventions, and then the rest of the time it's all kind of hodgepodge communication through the internet.
Right, and you can't read the inflection in their voice or the attitude in which it's written. So, I mean, a lot of times you'll see something and completely read it wrong, and that's not what they meant or how they meant it.
Right. Now, that's not saying, I will addend that. There's not people who throw firebombs in this community. There are people who love to stir up trouble.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But for the most part, because everybody's like, do you believe in paranormal unity? Well, I think overall that the bulk of us can absolutely get along, work together, never have a problem.
For sure.
It's a smaller group that makes it seem much larger than it is.
Well, the other thing is too, and I've noticed this over the past 25 years, is that the people who are the nastiest, the people who are kind of the bomb throwers of the groups. There's 2 different groups of people. One of them are the people who are kind of freshly in it. They've only been in it for a few months or a year, and they don't have a lot of close friends. Maybe the paranormal field isn't exactly what they thought it was going to be. And so, there's this disenchantment that they have. And that group of people will start problems. And then the other people who start problems are people who have been in it for a really, really long time. And I don't know if they're not getting enough recognition or enough notoriety, but they think that maybe the best way to get some attention is to stir up some trouble.
Well, and what kills me is, from what I've noticed from the ones causing drama, they're also the first ones to post the love and light every day.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And it's like, really? I just heard what you said. But, oh, love and light and blessings to everybody, and we don't fight with anybody, and you're the biggest part of this.
I posted something like that on Facebook a little while ago about, I made a little picture of a sunset, and it said, I find your motivational quotes not so inspired.
Right.
When your previous post was about how much you hated, a group of people.
I also like the one you posted. Well, apparently I'm the cause of all this paradrama. I was just informed of this.
Uh-oh.
You had typed that right after a bunch of brouhaha stirred. And then all of a sudden you were apparently part of it, and you never had a word to say in it, so.
Who, me?
Yeah.
I am never a part of drama.
Oh, I know you weren't, but apparently someone had accused you of it or said something about it because you had posted, Apparently.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah, that's the other thing, too, and I say this all the time. I say to my friends, at night when I go to the bar and hang out with some of my friends, I don't mind if people are nasty about me or they have something to say about me. I just don't do it where I can hear it. Do it behind my back. And I know that a lot of people think that sounds kind of counterintuitive. People are always like, oh, tell me to my face. I don't need to hear anything negative. If you want to be negative about me, you can do it where I don't hear it. It'll get back to me. And eventually also people will figure out that that person is being negative and maybe they should listen to that person.
Absolutely. Because they're like, someone, I can't remember who it was, is like, what's John talking about? I said, apparently he was accused of something he didn't do. How do you know he didn't do it? I said, because I know John well enough to where if he'd have started it, he'd have been standing on the closest soapbox screaming he started it.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm like, no, John stays out of that garbage.
I'll tell you a really funny, it's not a drama thing, but I'll tell you a really funny thing behind the scenes, something that I find amusing, which is there's this new trend now. Because I'm very vocal about people going on television and the kind of corruption that can happen to people by being on TV, somehow or another that word has gotten to certain television shows. Because there are people calling me now who are saying, like, oh, I was just asked to be on a television show. But one of their questions to me was, do I know John Tenney?
Oh.
And so knowing me is detrimental to anyone who might want to be on TV.
Well, I mean, plus after your last television show thing that lasted one episode.
Yeah.
But that's why Eric and I have so much respect for you, because you didn't play their game.
Oh, and then, this is one of the things, and this is one of those, when people watch paranormal reality shows now, like, they're getting more and more outrageous, more and more insane, the claims that are being made, the videos that are being shown. And that's because the people in our community who have common sense are refusing to do the shows. And so the only people that are agreeing to do the shows are people who really don't have a vested interest in this community. They just want to be on television, and so they'll say and do anything that they have to get on TV. And because of that, the shows get crazier and crazier and crazier.
Yeah, I find myself, I'll turn on one of the shows during the day, it's more background noise than it is actually watching them.
Yeah.
But I'll hear a certain word or a certain phrase, and I'll find myself screaming at the TV. Are you nuts? What are you talking about? But there's a new one coming out that is really freaky. Southern Ghost Hunters or something? Have you seen this?
I have not seen or heard anything about that. I don't have cable television. I still have good old 247 NBC, CBS, ABC, that's it.
Well, it's like ghost hunting Cajun style, but we're not talking like New Orleans voodoo priestess. We are talking swamp people, ghost hunters. This one guy kind of looks like Leonard Skinner, you know, the full beard and.
Right.
Yeah, I think it comes on the next week or so. I'm not sure.
I know that the people that I've talked to and the little behind the scenes stuff that I know, I know that there are like 4 new shows that are in production. One of them is a voodoo show. There's a voodoo ghost hunting show that's being worked on. And then there's and they're going to try and do another UFO show. There was a UFO show that kind of started, I think it was on maybe like Discovery or Animal Planet or something.
Okay.
That only aired a few episodes, and then the guys who were on the show actually wrote letters to the New York Times apologizing to people about the show. And so the producers told it that there's going to be a new UFO show that starts this year sometime, I think probably around October. And then I've heard of like 2 more that they're going to try and launch around Halloween time. But none of them, of course, they're saying they're reality shows. They're created to kind of make money and to generate controversy. So none of them are really doing anything to gather evidence or data or show, decent research practices that are not shocking people or making people laugh. Like you said, kind of swamp southern ghost hunters.
Yeah, I tried watching that Ghost Mines just to see how it went.
Right.
I wanted to pound my head against the wall. Well, I mean, they were using terms, not so much the 2 people that were on there, but like the coal miners were using terms that most people don't know, but they made no reason. They wouldn't explain what they were talking about.
Right.
The coal miners were talking about Tommy knockers.
Uh-huh.
They didn't explain what a Tommy knocker was. They didn't. At the end, when they were showing evidence, they didn't explain why they thought it was what it was.
Right.
It was just like, here you go. The end.
And that was only like a mini series or something, wasn't it?
I thought one of the guy who's on it, I thought he said they were getting ready to start filming the 2nd season, but
Maybe, but it's just one of the things, like you said, that by not explaining anything or not explaining why they're doing something, it becomes very apparent. These shows aren't about educating people; they're entertainment shows.
Right. Well, I mean, like 2 or 3 episodes later, I think one of the coal miners was talking to another one and telling him what they were talking about with Tommy knockers, because this was a newer coal miner who hadn't heard of it.
Right.
But they gave you nothing. I mean, it was basically a series about 2 ghost hunters who went in, totally ticked off the coal miners because apparently women aren't supposed to be in coal mines, 1, and 2, she was a redhead, so that's like a double no-no.
Right.
But they never explained that either.
Huh.
And I'm like, okay, what are we learning from this? Nothing. The coal miners are mean? I'm sure they're not. Set in their ways,
right.
Maybe, but I mean, people are people. But if you're not going to explain anything, what's the purpose of the show?
Right.
But we've discussed
and
the black suburban syndrome before, though. I mean, if a lot of people have it.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. If you look at, if you go back to the original shows, like In Search Of, even Unsolved Mysteries and stuff like that, they made it a point to educate people as to what was going on, why it was being researched, and now it really is just about showing people's faces when they scream. I've never understood why the cameras are always pointing so much at the investigators when you're trying to see what the investigator is seeing.
Right. that and what was it? They're like, oh, there's one particular group, and we both know who they are, because you get in trouble for talking bad, so I won't mention their names. But it's me and my two friends.
Yeah, I know that. You don't have to say the name of the show, but I'm assuming that it's some guys who have adventures with ghosts.
Yeah. It's just me and my cameraman and my tech guy. But when all three of them are in different locations and they're still being followed and filmed, have they trained the spirits to carry the cameras?
Right. Well, you know, it's a holdover, because if you watch the original episodes of that show, you can tell that it is being filmed by three guys.
Right.
But obviously, as its popularity increased, so did the production budgets, because they had no problem with posting photos on Twitter and on Facebook when they get to a location, and you can see that there's a production crew there with them. They have a food tent set up for the crew. There's hundreds and hundreds of, you guys, any investigator knows how long it takes to set up cameras and all the equipment, and you see just thousands of feet of cord and cable all around the location. So there's obviously more than three people there.
Well, see, my problem is, though, in the beginning of the show, they're still using that original, there's only three of us. Since then, I mean, everybody understands, you know, it's built. There's more people. Even in one of the prisons they investigate, there's two guys sitting at the watching the videos. So obviously there's more.
Yeah, and you know, I agree with you. Like, just all they have to do is take that little statement out of the beginning, and I'll be fine with it. You know?
Right. Well, and another pet peeve of mine on that one is we're in a lockdown. We can't get out. Nobody can get in. Yet halfway through almost every episode, they're opening the door and someone else is joining them. Right.
Well, my thing, and this it's not just about this show. It's just about going to a place in general. You know, I want to be able to investigate fully an entire location.
Right.
And I can't do that if I'm locked inside of the location. Sometimes I need to go outside and walk around the outside of the property and see what's going on out there. Sometimes I have to be up on the roof. Sometimes you can't just be locked into an old building that doesn't have power, that doesn't have electricity. And then in the case of television shows, if people believe that, you know, you have a popular television show with popular characters on it, and the network or the production company is going to allow them to be locked into a building, the insurance policies on them wouldn't allow them to be locked into buildings.
Well, I mean, it's not even necessarily paranormal shows. They had that one show, Survivor Guy.
Right.
Who's like out on a raft in the middle of the ocean, and he has no water, he has no food. Who's filming him? Flipper?
Right.
I mean, seriously. Nothing's going to happen to the man because the big boat is right next to him with the chef and the sunscreen and the bottled water and everything else.
Right, yeah. And that's part of the unreality of reality shows.
I just think
whether or not
reality shows either think we're really stupid or...
Well, you know, it's funny when you say that. I have a friend, local Detroit comedian, whose name's Corey Hall, and he was talking about reality shows a couple months ago, and he was talking about we kind of are dumb by liking reality shows, and he was talking about the fact that he watches a show called Hillbilly Hand Fishing.
Uh-huh.
And he said, you know, he goes, who's dumb? The people on the show or me? Because I'm watching a show about people I don't like, doing something I don't like, trying to catch a fish that I wouldn't eat.
Right. Well, some of them are like a train wreck. You just have to watch.
Right.
I mean, Honey Boo Boo is a perfect example. That is
right.
the most backwards show I've ever seen in my life. But it's funny.
For sure. And, you know, now that I'll mention it in a positive light. But, you know, one of the reasons that I will watch Ghost Adventures every now and then is because it's a funny show.
Well, I watch it because I like Aaron. But
Yeah.
We've met. I mean, it's not like I've got this big crush on him. We've met.
Right.
I like Aaron. I haven't met
Oh,
Nick.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think Aaron's a good guy. We've met a number of times. I've only had limited contact meeting Zach. You know, sometimes personalities just don't get along very well. But, you know, Aaron and I love Aaron. I think he's a really funny guy. He, you know, is super great to his fans.
He really is.
And the show is funny. Aaron really does make the show very funny.
Well, I've met Zach. Again, I like Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't met Nick. So I've
Right.
only got, you know, part of the thing, but I've met a lot of people. One of my favorite people, oddly enough, is Rob Demarest.
Oh, Rob is hysterical.
People are like, really? That guy off the GHI? It's like, you would not believe he is not the same in person as he is on TV. Like,
No, he's a big
you
teddy
are
bear.
not the same in person as you tend to appear at times on Facebook.
I do bill myself as creepy, and then people try and figure that out after they meet me. They're like, "You're not creepy."
Well, yes, he is, because I still have a bottle of John Tenney water.
That will probably be worth multiple dollars in the next few decades.
But let me tell you, this thing swells and puts itself back. It kind of morphs depending on the weather. This thing has twisted, dented, swelled up, sucked in, and everything else, but I have not ever unscrewed the cap.
That's funny.
I need to just put a camera on the John Tenney bottle, and people want to know how creepy you are. You can even do that to a bottle of water.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'll give you you and your listeners a little thing. I wrote about this recently, but I wrote an article on Weird Lectures a little while ago about how, in some instances, I've caught people trying to fake haunted locations.
Right.
And one of the ways that people do that is with plastic water bottles. And what they do is a person will take a plastic water bottle, they'll squeeze a little bit, they'll empty it of whatever water's in there, or, you know, they can use a pop bottle, whatever, any kind of plastic bottle, squeeze a little bit of the air out of it, and they'll put a dry ice chip inside and then cap it, and then put it somewhere in the house. Well, as the bottle expands because of the dry ice inside, you'll start to hear pops and snaps as the plastic starts to bend back into shape.
Right.
And you have such a little ice chip, the dry ice actually dissolves into nothing. So if an hour later someone finds a plastic bottle, they just find an empty plastic bottle.
That's wild. That I hadn't heard.
Isn't that crazy? And I've caught a couple different people doing that. So it's not like it's an uncommon practice. It was two separate locations, two separate people, and when I looked up where that actually comes from, it actually comes from what do you call it, haunted attractions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a gimmick that they use in haunted attractions. So, you know, when people, especially, I try not to do investigations or conferences at places that when you show up, they look like Halloween, even though it's, you know, April or May.
Right.
Because you never know how the place is wired. Do they have speakers in the walls? You know, are there cameras somewhere else that they're not letting you see, or are there projection systems in the location? So, you know, the couple times I've been presented with doing investigations at places like that, I actually will just kind of go out in the parking lot and talk to people as they come out after they've investigated.
Yeah, if it was a haunted house or a haunted attraction, you absolutely do not know what little mine traps that have been set.
Absolutely.
But you and I have had some interesting conversations. I mean, we don't always agree, but we kind of get to the same place. Like last time
Yeah.
I had talked to you, we had discussed time here as opposed to the other side.
Absolutely.
And my thing is, the other side wouldn't have what was it, daylight savings time or leap year.
Right.
And the other one was residual versus Groundhog Day.
Right.
And I'm sticking to it, John. I'm sticking to both of them.
Yeah, I have always tried to tell people, and this is what you were talking about when we discussed this. I've always tried to tell people, if there are these ethereal, weird, ghosty beings existing in a place that's not our reality, which it's obviously not. Then they can do things we can't do, so they're not living in the same world. Why would they have the same clock? Why would they have the same time, the same calendar? As a matter of fact, humans haven't even had the same calendar. We changed our calendar, 700 or 800 years ago,
right,
and then added leap days to it, and like you said, daylight savings time, and that was something that humans did so that we could keep track of time. But we're not talking about humans. We're talking about, what humans might become once they die. And I just don't see them carrying clocks around and calendars and checking the date to make sure now is a good time to haunt a place.
Well, my thing was basically, after so many postings from people, we were there on the anniversary of.
Right.
And my thing is, do some reverse math and get rid of daylight savings time, get rid of leap year and all those things, and back it up, and then try that different date.
Right.
As the anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
Because, even if, you don't have to go by the death. It could be their birthday, their wedding, their anniversary, the birth of their child, something.
For sure.
Because I think a lot of times they would be more apt to show up for a celebration than a tragedy.
Yep. Well, that ties into, too, someone recently, I just did an interview with a local newspaper, and they were asking about tragic sights and ghosts, and I was saying just kind of what you said about positive energy. And, people, a lot of times I've investigated locations, and people, we can't get a fix on, what might be in the house. And one of the things you don't take into consideration is all the people that have lived in locations and stuff, maybe there's someone who's passed away who had a great experience in that house, and they didn't live there, but they had a great experience there once, and that's where they want to be. And so, you're not going to necessarily have a perfect chain of evidence of everyone that's ever been in the house to know who you're dealing with.
Well, right, and we had that conversation during my I don't believe in residual so much.
Right.
Because they say, okay, you leave your mark, you leave your footprint, you leave your energies, the walls, the floors, whatever. But if you're in a 200-year-old building, especially like a place that was a hospital and then a morgue and a school and, some of these buildings, they've been 30 different things in this 200 years. Every energy from every single person, you wouldn't be able to walk in the place. The energy would be so thick.
Right.
So I don't think it's just, well, this person's there because their energy's in the wall. Well, no, not really. Because everybody would be. My thing is maybe they're trying to alter something that happened. Good or bad.
Right. And plus, there's the possibility, like we discussed before, there's the possibility that, it's still going on. That for them it might be happening right now.
Right.
That all time exists at the same time. And so we're just kind of seeing these echoes and blips of something that's occurring for the first time.
Right. Or like I said, maybe because I think the one I use with you is the lady who's in the house and the 2-year-old gets out and drowns.
Right, yeah.
That maybe, she is reliving it sort of like that movie Groundhog Day, getting to the point to where, she's at the stove cooking, stirring, but she's also kind of listening for that scream maybe. To be able to stop it.
Yep.
Residual, I think there has to be a better reason than just a tape playing.
Well, and that's why, that's why it's what we're doing, what serious researchers are doing is so important, because we have these great guesses, but, to a certain degree, we have to also educate people that are just coming into this field, because people hear about residual energy and they never think past it. They don't try and come up with new concepts. And that's part of, at least for me, that's what I feel is part of our biggest job, is coming up with new ideas that we can test and talk to each other about and speculate about and try and get to the best answer we can get to at this point.
Right. And this is the first time anybody on our show has heard my theories. But I have talked to you. I've talked to David. I've talked to Johnny Hauser.
Mm-hmm.
I picked very specific people for very specific reasons to come out of the closet with these theories first.
We appreciate it, and I love hearing it. And, that's the whole thing. When you do that, when you open up like this and tell people your theories, it's one more great way to show people, because there are a lot of people who have these great ideas, and sometimes for whatever reason, we don't get to hear about them, and we just have to share our ideas. And I have no problem with being wrong. I'm sure you don't either. I'm wrong many times throughout my life about many different things, but I'm not going to be right until I get my information out there and have someone spot check it for me or toss the idea around with me and try and develop the idea. Excuse me.
Right, and that's why I went to Johnny Hauser, because of the Axe Murder House. There are specific dates.
Right.
They have specific names, so that's why I brought my weird calendar thing to him first, because it is a place where it can be tested regularly.
Right.
Because to me, if you're going to the same place every year on the same day and you're not getting anything, try something different. That's what we're there for.
Yep. And I'll tell you, we'll have a conversation off air. I'll tell you what we're going to talk about some other time, and I'll email you some data that you can look at, which kind of goes to your point. But there was a house in Detroit that I investigated for about 8 years, and I had, it was part of my idea was I wanted to know what was going on in that house every day of the year, every season of the year, through every lunar and solar event, through all of the different climate changes and throughout the year, and over multiple years, and see when the house was most active. And to go to your point, I found out that the house burnt down now, but it's Detroit, right? So our house is burned down all the time. I was lucky to have it for 8 years. But what I found out is there was a date in November when the house seemed to be most active. But it was most active, and it would change very slightly every year, just by a few minutes. And what was fascinating was that little bump in change seemed to coincide with the Earth being relative to the Sun and the orbital change of Earth, and the Sun's orbital change to the galactic center. So it seemed like there wasn't a specific day, but like the day was changing because the Earth was moving through space in a different way every year.
That actually makes a lot of sense.
So like you were saying, it wasn't a calendar date. It was something that was having to do with a date that actually is related to the entire universe.
Right.
Not a human-constructed January 3rd.
Right. Well, my big one is the New London school explosion here.
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere between 250 and 600 people died, mostly children. And everybody's like, well, the anniversary's coming up. And I mean, okay. But back in 37, it wasn't the same. I mean, take away the leap years, take away, because I think daylight savings time had either just started or hadn't quite started. It's real close to that timeline.
Mm-hmm.
To where if you take away that too, it changes the whole outcome. The explosion happened March 18th, 1937.
Right.
That doesn't mean you're going to get something in that area on March 18th at any given time.
Right. And we don't know how massive tragedy, if they are experiencing time chronologically different than we experience it, perhaps, the perception of time is always interesting to me. The fact that I hated math when I was in high school, and my math class seemed to be 3 hours long, but my English class, which wasn't, the same length of time, but my perception of time changed according to me.
Right. Well, it's like traveling. When you're going to a con, it always seems to take longer than when you're going home.
Right.
Because of the anticipation.
Yeah, and so it sends me to wonder, if in this spirit world where time is perhaps more based on the perception of the being that exists in there, if they don't recognize that, let's say they don't recognize that they're not alive anymore, and they could be speeding and slowing up their own time.
Right. Well, that goes to, don't walk into a place and say, when did you die? They may not know it.
Right.
We found out two of the best things to talk about when you're in a new location, or even one you go into quite frequently, is to ask them about food and sex.
Mm-hmm.
We seem to get more because, hot chocolate or a cup of coffee or roast beef, whatever, something they really like, they'd rather talk about that than, well, I got sick.
Well, I'll tell you a little secret trick that I do sometimes. And you talk about ideas coming out of the closet. Here's a little secret John Tenney trick that I don't discuss very often. But if I'm going to be doing some kind of session in a house, and I have a curious date that looks to be like maybe it's somehow connected with the events in the house, what I'll actually do is I'll find a newspaper from that particular date, and I'll sit around with another person, and we'll read that newspaper together and talk about what's going on at that time.
That it's like an error cue, but it's a different version of it. It's really actually kind of cool.
So, because like you're saying, it's always kind of been troublesome to me sometimes when people are looking for the ghost of someone who passed away in the 1800s, and they're saying, talk into my tape recorder. And I'm like, how do they know what a tape recorder is? Well,
and come up to the red light. Back then, the red light was fire.
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, that's another one of my pet peeves. Make this blink. Okay, if they didn't have electricity, how do they know what blink is? Other than their eyes.
Yep. Which is why there's a lot of investigators still to this day. I know it seems controversial, but there are a few investigators, myself included, who every now and then will still use candles.
Well, I'm a dowser.
Right.
Simply because not everything needs batteries, and everything with batteries doesn't make it scientific.
Right. And a lot of, it's been stated ad nauseum. The greatest piece of equipment you have is your brain.
Yep, and one of your strongest tools on an investigation is not only your brain, but an ink pen.
Absolutely. I can't tell you, Kim, how many notepads and notebooks I have filled up in my house with notes from investigations.
Oh, trust me, I am considered by some, especially Dr. Jim. He calls me the 411 because I literally have a file cabinet full of nothing but used notebooks. And I write everything all day long, investigations, conversations, everything. So I never lose anything.
Right.
And he'll come to me like a year, 18 months, 3 years later. Do you remember that conversation? You told me this number, and I'll go back and pull out that notebook, flip, 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 and give him the number.
But I'll tell you what, it really, like for doing Realm of the Weird, the podcast Realm of the Weird, like those are all based on my cases, and it's the reason that I can even do those episodes is because I took such vigorous notes. I have endless amounts of recordings with the interviews with the clients, and I'm a pack rat about it. And you need to collect that much data if you're doing something seriously. And for me, the benefit of having that was that I could do something like Realm of the Weird, where I can go back 10 years, 12 years, 20 years, and actually, have the conversations again that I had 20 years ago.
Absolutely. And you've been in it, what, 27 or 28 years?
Oh, it's got to be, my first unofficial investigation I did was when I was 16. So that would have been 86. But I didn't do my first real investigation and my first lecture until 89.
Okay. So yeah, 27 years.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Well, when we first met, you said you've been at approximately 25 years, so I went by when we met to now, so yeah, that's about right.
Yeah. Because I did my first unofficial investigation when I was 16, and that was the year that I met my mentor, his name's Craig, who was the Kennedy assassinologist. And that's when I started assisting him with his research into government conspiracies and going to the National Archives with him and working with him. And then, when I did my first unofficial investigation, in 1986, it was such a different world because the only way that I knew how to do things was, I had some books and I had seen a couple of in search ofs and talked to a few people. But, it's really difficult now to watch people think that they can go and buy an EMF detector and go into a place and that's all they need. Because
right.
Even my initial investigations, when I was, the first one I did when I was 16, I studied the location and I learned all about the history of the location and it was, even though it was the very first time I did it and kind of poorly thought out, it still seems like I was doing more than a lot of professional, quote-unquote, groups do today.
Well, that's where you and I agree because I like to research the place ahead of time. And you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, no, I want to go in cold. I think you said it once, but I like to go in with some idea of a name, so I'm not going, hey, is anybody here? What's your name? I'd like to say, is Anna here? Or,
Yeah, if I'm going into a location, and, it is actually kind of, it's two different methods for me, because if I'm going into a location where it's not not someone's home or it's not currently being used as a residence, then I want to know the history of that location. If it's a place, if a client, I take clients on every year, like I have 3 this year, 2 that have been ongoing for a few years and 1 new one. But when I take on a new client, I do a very cursory interview with them because I don't want to be influenced by what they think, because they don't know. They're the client. They've
right.
come to me. And I don't want my brain filled up with their speculations right away.
Absolutely. But I want to go in with enough knowledge not to be screaming into the dark
For sure.
and appearing disrespectful. If you're going into the Shanley Hotel, you ask for Mr. Shanley or Mrs. Shanley.
Mm-hmm.
You don't go in and go, hey, who's here?
Right.
To me, it's like at Old South Pittsburgh Hospital. We know certain patients were in certain rooms. When we go to those rooms, we knock on the door and introduce ourselves to that person.
Right.
It's respect, and we seem to get more that way.
For sure. And, when I do, we have a lot of abandoned houses in the Metro Detroit area. And like you said, it's very handy for me to know the families that have lived there, to know the history, the history of the property. The city that I live in, which is Royal Oak, it's a few miles, about 10 miles outside Detroit proper. There were huge Indian settlements in Royal Oak, and so that's something that you have to take into account too. That one of our major roads, which is called Crooks Road. The reason it's called Crooks is because it was originally called the Crooked Trail, and it's where the First Nations people used to walk to get to Detroit. And so there were encampments and settlements all along Crooks Road, which are all residential houses now.
Right. But
so it's important to know that history.
But so many people are like, no, I'd rather go in cold. I don't want to know anything. I'll figure it out. Well,
yeah.
If okay, say Mr. Bennett was murdered, it's a lot better than going, how'd you get killed? How'd you die? Well,
for sure. And
if you know this information, then you can skip that part and go into, what's your favorite meal.
Yep. And the other thing is too is knowing the history. At that event where I was with David and Tracy at the Emmett House, one of the things about knowing the history there, before I went there, I had looked online at what they said was happening and what the hotel was all about and what they thought they were experiencing. And then before I went to that event, I did my research, and I went into the background of the Emmett House, and I searched everything that I could. And when I got there, I walked in and I introduced myself to everyone, and one of the first things I said was, in your brochures and how you talk about this place, you said this and it's not correct. You said this and it's not correct. And you said this and it's not correct. So, that's another thing about when you go in cold, you're kind of apt and open to everything.
Right.
But if you have some background and some knowledge, before you even start, you can go in and say, listen, we're already on a wrong foot, so you need to start telling people that, this wasn't a safe haven for the Underground Railroad. These people didn't live here. And you can actually go through it and start to whittle away the folklore behind locations. And that helps you find what's actually happening in those locations.
I've done that, and I've actually ticked off a tour guide to the point where they left me alone in the museum. Well, in New London, Texas, the Explosion Museum. I can't think of it. I think it's called the New London School Explosion Museum or something like that. But I'm in there, and I did my research. I studied every single thing I could get in on. I read statements from children who were there, stories that were handed down through the families, et cetera, and I walk in, and she's saying, well, this happened on this date, and I'm like, no, it didn't. Well,
right.
They took them over to this hospital. No, they didn't. They took them over to this one, and that hospital wasn't even open yet. They had to open that day because of this explosion. And after about the fourth or fifth time I did that tour, she's like, just yell if you need me, and she walked away.
Well, that happened to me recently. In Detroit, we have our own little cryptozoological creature in Detroit. He's called the Nain Rouge, the Red Dwarf. And he's been supposedly spotted in Detroit since the 1700s. And in the past couple of years, some people figured that out, or I don't know if they read. There's very few people who have written about it. And a couple of years ago, these guys started this thing called, it's like the Parade of the Red Dwarf. And so every year they get hundreds of people, and they chase the Red Dwarf out of Detroit. It's symbolic of, trying to help Detroit come back. And one of the things they don't realize, because they've never really read the literature, they don't know anything about kind of what they're doing, and this made them really mad when I pointed it out, was that the Red Dwarf was actually based on a Native American legend. And the Native Americans knew that something bad was going to happen if they saw the Red Dwarf. So the red dwarf wasn't causing problems. He was actually forewarning them that there were going to be problems. And I pointed out to these guys, if you're being serious about what you're doing is you're chasing away the one thing that's trying to help you know when something bad is going to happen.
You're chasing away your alarm.
Right. And they don't like that because obviously the way that they built this parade, they sell a lot of T-shirts and coffee mugs and, there's a lot of sponsorships for it. And so they're like, oh yeah, but we don't want to tell anybody that. Well, so you don't want to tell anybody the truth.
Yeah, so you're just having a parade to make fun of something that you know nothing about.
Right. And like how you were left behind by the tour guide, am not invited to the parade.
Yeah, she wasn't happy with me because she's like, oh, well, this church is over here in Tyler. And I'm like, no, that church is right next door to my friend's house.
Yep.
Oh, no, it's not. Yes, it is. And just so happened the friend who lived next door to it was with me. And I'm like, Lori, what's that? She's like, the church right next door. And I kind of looked at the tour guide. Yeah, she wasn't happy with me. But if you're going to give a historic tour, know the history.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, John.
What was that?
Well, John, I hate to do it. It's that time. It's past that time.
Oh, okay.
But it's always lovely talking to you, and I know you have plenty of things you need to plug.
Not too much. People should go to the Lower Catskills Terracon on May 3rd and 4th. How's that? Is that a good plug?
Absolutely. But you also have Realm of the Weird and Weird Lectures, so,
realmoftheweird.com, weirdlectures.com. I just started a little comedy podcast that's called Top Tennies.
I saw that today.
And it's just a really silly little podcast. It's something that I can do to not be so paranormally minded. I try and be funny sometimes. So if people go to facebook.com/toptennies, they can listen to the first 2 episodes. There's only 2, so they're on the ground floor. And, just the 2 websites. That's all they really need to do.
Well, I have to ask, what is this year's T-shirt?
I can't reveal that.
Dang
Actually, last year I stopped selling T-shirts. Did you know that?
No, I got the first one. I got the Tinny Creeps Me Out, and then I wanted the Boom Tinny, but it never materialized.
Yeah, it was one of those things. I stopped selling them. I'll be quick about this. I know we're long. We went long, but
I own the place.
But it just became one of those things where when I was at conventions and at events, I felt like sitting at a table and having this merchandise in front of me was inhibiting people from talking to me because they felt like if they talked to me, they needed to buy something. And I didn't want to do that. And so the easiest way I figured out I could get around that was on Weird Lectures, I put like a donate button. Mm-hmm. And I told people, listen, if you like what I do and you want to support me, you can donate $2 or $3. And that way when I go to conventions, I don't have to sell buttons and T-shirts and stickers. I might have some things that I can give away. But the whole point of going to these conventions and conferences is to be able to talk to people. And sometimes when there's someone sitting behind a table with a stack of books and a whole bunch of merchandise, you kind of want to say hello, but then as you stand there, you feel kind of this desire or the need to maybe have to buy something. And not everybody can afford stuff in this day and age.
Oh, absolutely. And we had discussed that. That's why our prices are really low compared to a lot of other conventions.
Yep.
Because you can't afford it. I mean, let's face it, Eric was out of work for over a year. I know times are tough, so that's why we were making everything reasonable.
And that's one of the reasons I adore you.
Now you made me blush. Well, John, hopefully at some point we get to see each other this year. Hopefully at Little Green Men.
That would be nice. That would be very nice. Are you going to the convention where David and Tracy are getting married?
I'm not quite sure yet. That they had contacted me yesterday about cross-promoting our cons.
Right.
So it's a possibility, but I'm not sure yet.
Well, just know that any place that David and Tracy are together, there's the possibility that I might show up.
Well, then I have to make sure my camcorder's fully charged so we know who ran over who.
All right, Kim.
John, I want to thank you so very much. You are always so much fun, and you know we adore you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You know I adore you too, and you'll start getting shipments of books relatively soon.
Okay. Well, let me get out of here and hang on just a second. Okay, guys, that's it for tonight. I'd tell you who's on next week, but yeah, I can't because I didn't write it down. Shows how much I'm paying attention. Anyway, tune in every night. There's always live shows every night. Monday night, check out Just Saying. We have Jeff Leeper from the Taps Crew. Not the show, but the actual Taps Crew. And with that, we're out of here. Have a great night. Be safe. And see you Monday.